Hello everyone, thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't fallen asleep yet, you might as well listen to this story, and maybe you will fall asleep soon. Before listening, please like and subscribe first. Of course, the premise is that you really like my content. If you have any thoughts or feelings, please leave a message below. Your opinions will really help me grow. Okay, enough chit-chat. Let's get started. I was squatting in the autopsy room reading the autopsy report when my cell phone vibrated in my trouser pocket. The victim's left little finger was fractured, caused by grabbing the murder weapon while struggling. Detective Hawk. The dispatcher's voice was filled with electrical noise. 17 Clarence Street. The landlord reported that the tenant had been missing for 2 weeks. There was something unusual at the scene. I closed the report and the metal clasp clicked.
Abnormal. These 2 words were enough to make me leave the half-remaining cup of coffee on the table.
The old building on Clarence Street smells musty. The landlord, Margaret, tried 3 times before inserting the key into the lock. Her fingertips were pale as she said, "Miss Jane takes out the trash on time at 7 o'clock every day." The day before she disappeared, she greeted me downstairs and said, "Today's sunset is so beautiful." The door opened. I stepped on the entrance mat. The slippers were placed in a symmetrical shape. The mug on the coffee table was stained with half a circle of coffee, and the leaves of the green ivy on the windowsill were polished to a shine, as if someone had deliberately created the illusion that the owner would be back at any time. No one has lived here for 2 weeks. How can it be so clean? Margaret's voice trembled. I came to change the light bulb this morning, and as soon as I pushed the door open, I felt cold. I squatted down. In the crack of the floor, there was a drop of dark brown blood, like a solidified tear. Jane's blood type. I looked up the tenant information provided by Margaret, and it was type O.
That's impossible.
She came closer. She cut her finger last month, and I helped her get the band-aid. It's clearly... I raised my hand to interrupt her. His fingertips hovered 3 centimeters above the bloodstain, and his Adam's apple moved. The contact tracing capability 3 times a month was worth using this time. The moment my skin touched the floor, my retinas exploded with white light. A gloved hand with white knuckles was wiping the floor with a wet cloth. The corner of the cloth was stained with dark red, and the place where it was wiped was shining with water, but this drop had leaked. 10 seconds later, the image disappeared faster than a flash. I fished out the evidence bag, and just as the tip of the tweezers touched the bloodstain, Margaret suddenly pulled my sleeve. And this. She took out a crumpled piece of paper from her apron pocket. I swept it from under the bed when I was cleaning. It looks like a receipt. The receipt had burrs on the edges, and was dated 3 months ago. There was no store name, and the amount column only said 200-500 with the lowercase numbers trailing off very long. I held the watermark up to the light. It was the embossed paper common in antique shops. "Have you ever seen her wearing jewelry?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "She always wears turtlenecks and scarves in the summer." When I went downstairs, I met Albert, who lived next door. The old man was holding a pile of old books, and his eyes behind the glasses suddenly lit up. "Are you here to check on Miss Jane? What did you notice?" "I got up at 10:30 the night before last." He pointed upstairs. There was a man's voice in Miss Jane's room, shouting in a low voice. The old man adjusted his glasses. "I am hard of hearing, but I heard this sentence clearly. You shouldn't have come." After I finished taking notes, he suddenly stuffed a piece of candy into my hand. "Miss Jane always helps me collect express deliveries. Last time there was a box with the sender writing flower shop." She turned very pale after opening it. The DNA report from the police arrived faster than I expected. Type A blood. Charlot from the technical department pushed up his glasses. "It matches Colin Reed, the fugitive from the Ontario jewelry robbery 3 years ago, with a 99.7. I tightened my grip around the report. "In the case 3 years ago, Witness Alicia Carter identified Colin as the gunman who killed someone. She accidentally fell off a bridge a week before the trial, and her body was never found. Later, Colin changed his confession and accused the witness of perjury. The judge gave him a light sentence of 5 years due to insufficient evidence, but he escaped from prison last year. The computer screen was on, and I opened Jane's social account. The last update was 3 days before she disappeared, with the caption, "It's time to end." The photo was of a cup of cold coffee, and in the reflection one could see half of her face with bean paste-colored lipstick on. I zoomed in on the photo. The trajectory of the water droplets on the wall of the cup matches the arc of the coffee stains on the mug, on the coffee table in her room. Exactly. She didn't leave, I said to the air. Or rather, she left very deliberately. Xiao Lu leaned over and said, "I checked her driver's license and employment certificate. They were all fake. Her social security number didn't match any records." I twirled the pen and poked a hole in the words Jane Harper with the tip of the pen. Margaret said she always carried a black canvas bag. Albert said she turned pale when she opened the package. The bloodstains were from Colin, and the receipt was from the antique shop. "Bring up Alicia's case file from 3 years ago," I said suddenly. Xiao Lu was stunned. "Isn't she dead?" I didn't answer, staring at Jane's updates on the computer. The last one was posted at 21:17, more than an hour after the quarrel at 10:30 that Albert mentioned, long enough for her to write that farewell note. And then, tonight at 10 o'clock, I closed the file. "Come with me to 17 Clarence Street." Xiao Lu opened his mouth, but I raised my hand to stop him. I took out the magnifying glass from my pocket, the lens still covered with dust from Jane's room. Those neatly arranged slippers, the shiny green ivy, the missed bloodstains, the receipt without the store name. It's as perfect as a math problem, and I have to find the decimal point that was overlooked in the solution. As I walked out of the police station, the evening breeze lifted the hem of my windbreaker. The street lamp stretched the shadow very long, like an arrow pointing to number 7. I looked down at my watch, and it was still 3 hours until 10 o'clock. It was enough for me to check the receipts in the evidence bag again, enough for me to think clearly. Jane Harper, or Alicia Carter, whether these traces she left behind were flaws or invitations. The voice-activated light in the stairwell came on when I stepped onto the 3rd step. There was a cordon hanging on the door of number 17, which made a slight rustling sound in the wind. I fished out the spare key. Margaret had thrust it into my hand this morning, saying, "The police need to check it at all times." The moment the door opens, the deliberately maintained sense of daily life hits you in the face. I squatted in front of the floor and held a magnifying glass against the bloodstain. This time, I wasn't looking for a missed wipe mark, but his fingertips hovered above the bloodstain, then retracted. The ability to use it 3 times a month must be used to the best effect. I stood up and looked at the green ivy on the windowsill. The back of the leaves were a little dusty, not as polished to a shine as Margaret had said. I plucked a leaf. A very thin silver thread was wrapped around the leaf stem, which shone in the light. The phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a message from Xiao Lu. In Alicia's case file, there is a photo of her wearing pearl cufflinks. I held the silk thread and suddenly remembered Colin's statement when he was arrested. My custom-made cufflinks, sterling silver, engraved with CR. The wind blew in through the window, rustling the leaves of the green radish. I looked at the drop of type A blood on the floor, and finally smiled. It turned out that it was not an omission. She left it intentionally to give me a clue. I put the thread into the evidence bag, and knocked over the mug on the coffee table when I turned around. The coffee stain spread across the wood like a brown flower. I squatted down to wipe it, and my fingers touched half a piece of paper pressed on the bottom of the cup. It was the other half of the receipt. The store name was torn off, but the word antique could be clearly seen. The phone vibrated again. Xiao Lu sent a new message. 3 years ago, in a jewelry robbery, Among the stolen goods there was a pair of sterling silver cufflinks engraved with CR. I stared at the note, my heart beating like a drum. Jane's room is so clean as a mirror, and all the abnormalities are cracks on the mirror. Through these cracks what I see is not a disappearance but a carefully designed drama to lure the snake out of its hole. There were sirens outside the window. I stood up and carefully put the note into the file. 10 o'clock tonight is just the beginning. The real drama will not begin until Colin follows these floors to find them. I took one last look at the tidy room and closed the door. Before the voice-controlled light in the corridor went out, I caught a glimpse of light leaking through the crack in the door, casting a blurry shadow on the wall, like a person standing in the middle of the room, looking down at the bloodstains on the floor, a smile on his lips.
That was Jane Harper,
or Alicia Carter, leaving me with a final tip. The lampshade shook as I slapped the case file on Jane Harper's bedside table. The mug that I knocked over before leaving last night is still there, and the coffee stain looks like a dark brown scar. I squatted down and gently scratched the half receipt at the bottom of the cup with my fingernails. The word antique was wrinkled by the coffee, and the edges had rough edges as if they were torn by hand. This is the second time I've entered this room. The cordon was still hanging on the door, but Margaret sent me a message for the 7th time this morning. Detective Hawke, do you need me to send a new set of keys? I stared at her name on the screen of my phone and suddenly remembered what Albert said, that there were male voices arguing in Jane's room the night before she disappeared. The landlord's enthusiasm always seems to be behind a layer of frosted glass. I took out a magnifying glass and moved it inch by inch along the edge of the bedside table. There was a white spot on the wood-colored paint surface, and when I scratched it with my fingernail, I could feel a slight bump. It was a scratch. When the magnifying glass was attached, his pupils shrank. Half a fingerprint was embedded deep in the scratch, and the line was broken at the knuckle of the thumb, as if it had been cut by a knife.
Shaolu, pull up Colin Reed's fingerprint file. I shouted into the phone, my nails tapping on the bedside table.
5 minutes later, the phone vibrated. In the photo, Colin's left thumbprint is spread out on the screen, and the position of the fracture is exactly the same as the comparison picture I just took. My hand tightened around the phone, and I thought of Alicia Carter's testimony 3 years ago. He was wearing silver cufflinks engraved with CR, which fell behind the counter during the robbery. The door was suddenly pushed open. Margaret poked her head in, holding a porcelain plate in her hand. Detective, I made hot cocoa. I put my phone upside down on the bedside table. Her eyes swept over the magnifying glass in my hand, and her Adam's apple moved. Ms. Margaret, I stood up. Can I see your phone? Her pupils suddenly contracted. When Zhao Zhao from the technical department came over with his phone, Margaret was shaking as she clutched the corner of her apron. Cloud backup automatically synchronizes. Zhao Zhao shook the tablet. She installed 7 micro cameras under the bed, in the curtain box, in the pot of green radish. The video starts playing. At 2:17 in the morning, Jane, wearing a grey nightgown, squatted in front of the crack in the floor. She picked up a silver object with tweezers and held it up to the lamp. The camera zoomed in, and I could see clearly that it was a cufflink. A sterling silver cufflink engraved with CR, with dark red blood stained on the edge. Stop. I pressed the pause button. In the video, Jane's face turned around and was facing the camera under the bed. There was a smile on her lips, as if she was looking at the person behind the camera. Margaret suddenly burst into tears. I just want to make sure the tenants are safe. I ignored her. The phone vibrated and heated up in his pocket. It was the FBI's international hotline. Alicia Carter. The other party's voice was filled with electric noise. The only witness who identified Colin in the jewelry robbery 3 years ago. She was transferred from the protection program last December, and her new identity is Jane Harper. Reason for transfer. Colin Reed has escaped from prison. Veins bulged in my hand as I held the phone. The antique store receipt from 3 months ago. The A blood type. Jane's is O type. The CR cufflinks that were left behind intentionally. All the flaws were strung together to point to Alicia Carter's plot. She was luring Colin into the trap. Detective Hawk. Xiao Zhao ran in from outside. Colin's positioning signal appeared in Toronto, right on Clarence Street. I grabbed the silver thread in the evidence bag, which was removed from the stem of the green radish. There is a tiny metal ring tied to the end of the thread, which fits perfectly into the buttonhole of the cufflink that Jane had clipped out in the video. The voice-activated lights in the corridor suddenly went out. In the dark, I felt for half of Colin's fingerprint on the bedside table. The fingertips hovered 2 centimeters above, and then retracted. I do contact recall 3 times a month. I used it on bloodstains last time, so I have 2 left. The phone screen lit up, and it was a message from Xiaolu. In Alicia's case file, the coordinates of her last safe house were erased. I looked at the drop of type A blood on the floor, and suddenly remembered Albert's words in the quarrel. You shouldn't have come. Now that I think about it, it was more like a warning. Not to Jane, but to Colin. There was a sound of a car braking suddenly outside the window. I walked to the window and saw a man in a leather jacket standing under the streetlight downstairs, looking up at the window on the 2nd floor. His left hand was in his pocket, with an old scar on the thumb joint. It was Colin Reed. I stepped back to the center of the room and stared at the imprint of the cufflinks left in the cracks in the floor. The silver thread in the evidence bag left a red mark on the palm of his hand. The bloody cufflink was in the refrigerator of the physical evidence department, stained with Alicia's body temperature and Colin's blood. The ability to use it 3 times a month must be used to the best effect. I took out my phone and sent a message to Xiao Zhao. Send Colin's cufflinks to my office. When I turned around, the wind lifted the curtains and made the leaves of the green radish rustle. There was a very thin silver thread wrapped around the leaf stalk, exactly the same as the one I removed. I stared at the thread and suddenly laughed. The clues Alicia Carter left behind were never meant for Colin. She had already calculated that there would be a detective holding a magnifying glass, squatting on the floor, piecing together all the fragments to form the truth. 10 o'clock tonight is just the beginning. The real show will only begin when I touch the bloody cufflink. I stared at the office door, the second hand ticking on the wall louder than my heartbeat. When Xiao Zhao put the freezer bag on my desk 10 minutes ago, the crisp sound of the metal buckles colliding made the hairs on the back of my hand stand up. The cufflink was wrapped in a transparent evidence bag. The dark red blood stain looked like a solidified scab, with dark brown edges, exactly the same position as the one where Colin's thumb was scratched in the surveillance video when he was arrested 3 years ago. I pulled off my latex gloves. The contact recall is done 3 times a month. The last time it was used on a bloodstain was 7 days ago, and there are 2 left now. The moment my fingertips touched the plastic bag, I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Snowflakes flashed before my eyes. It's Jane. She was wearing a black windbreaker with the collar turned up to her ears, and she was looking down at her cell phone in the dim corridor. As rain sounded in the background, she whispered into her headset, "I know he'll come looking for me. I'll make him believe I'm dead." The picture suddenly distorted. The 10-second limit was up. I pulled my hand back abruptly, a thin layer of sweat breaking out on my forehead. The residual temperature from the cufflink seeped into the palm of her hand through the plastic bag. It was not Jane's body temperature, but Colin's blood, carrying his paranoid heat. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Jennifer's name popped up, and the FBI liaison officer's voice was like an icicle. "Detective Hawk, Alicia Carter, has been relocated. She lived at 17 Clarence Street for 3 months before being relocated." I pushed the cufflinks under the lamp, and the bloodstains glowed purple in the warm light. 3 months was enough time for her to lay out the clue. Members of the Witness Protection Program will not voluntarily reveal their whereabouts, but Colin escaped from prison. I tapped the case file on the table. When she identified him 3 years ago, he stared at her in the courtroom, as if he wanted to grind her bones into ashes. She knew better than us that she couldn't hide. Jennifer was silent for 2 seconds. Do you have evidence? I opened the drawer and pulled out the antique store receipt. When I found it under the floor of Jane's room 3 days ago, I looked at it 20 times with a magnifying glass and thought it was just ordinary waste paper. Now when I shine it under the ultraviolet light, a line of small light blue words emerge on the back. 9 Clare Lane. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I hung up the phone and grabbed my coat. Clare Lane is in the old town, and most of the street lights are broken. The iron door of the warehouse had a rusty lock on it, and I kicked it 3 times before it opened. The smell of mold mixed with damp soil came out. There were several empty cardboard boxes piled at the base of the wall, and the top one had a fragile label on it, which matched what Albert said. I had received 2 suspicious express deliveries for Jane. The old newspapers on the wall were curled up due to being soaked by rain, and a headline, "The main culprit in the jewel robbery escaped from prison, and the police are offering a reward for his arrest," was irritating. Colin's photo was circled again and again with a red pen, and the ink seeped through the paper and cast a dark red halo on the wall like a withered flower. Detective Xiao Lu ran over holding the evidence bag. "This is in the box." It was half a courier note, with CR written in the sender column, the initials of Colin's name. I turned around holding the delivery slip. The wind blew in through the broken window, making the newspaper rustle. Colin's photo swayed in the wind, and his eyes seemed to follow me. On the way back to the police station, my phone lit up. An anonymous text message. "You are too close to the truth." I held the phone against my thigh and stared out the windshield at the night. In the rearview mirror, Xiao Lu was taking pictures of the evidence, and Xiao Zhao's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. They didn't notice that when we passed the 3rd intersection just now, a black car followed us through 3 red lights. The case report was spread out on the desk, with the blackened area under the name Jane Harper showing rough edges. Got out my pen, placed the tip of the pen over the blackened area, paused for 3 seconds, and drew a question mark. A police car siren was heard outside the window. Xiao Zhao pushed the door open and came in, with raindrops on his forehead. "The surveillance camera at warehouse number 9, Clare Lane, has been repaired." I put the pen into the cap and the metallic sound was as crisp as a gunshot. "Check it," I said. "Check it now." When I parked the car at the entrance of Clare Alley, Xiao Lu's flashlight was already leaking out of the broken door of the warehouse. "Detective," he waved the evidence bag. "There's something behind the wall of newspaper clippings." I walked over the broken glass. The stack of old newspapers at the foot of the wall had become hard due to being soaked by rain, and the back of the bottom sheet was stained with glue. Someone had deliberately glued them together to form a covering layer. I tore off the last one, and the musty smell mixed with the smell of ink, revealing a hand-drawn map on the wall, with 3 points marked in red pen. Chinatown Pawn Shop, Queen's Park Bench, and 17 Clarence Street. It matches Jane's address. Xiao Zhao came over to take a look. "What is she marking?" I didn't answer. One of the cardboard boxes piled in the corner was kicked open, revealing half a sneaker. The uppers were covered in mud, but the size sticker on the inside of the tongue was still there. Size 37, the same pair Jane had been wearing in the convenience store surveillance video before she disappeared. Someone just came here. I squatted down and rubbed the mud on the surface of my shoes with my fingertips, which was not completely dry yet. The sound of the side door being suddenly pushed open startled Xiao Lu so much that his flashlight dropped to the ground. A gray figure flashed by, with the hood of his hoodie pulled down low. I only had time to see that he was holding a silver object in his hand, like a cufflink. "Chase!" I ran away. Most of the streetlights in the alley were broken. When Shadow turned the 3rd intersection, a delivery truck suddenly stopped in the middle of the road with its rear door wide open. I stopped and saw the last 3 digits of the license plate were 79. When I looked up again, the hoodie was gone. Found it. A G from the technical team tapped on the computer. License plate 79 belongs to Swift Logistics. The registrant is Ethan Blair. He was detained 3 years ago on suspicion of illegally transporting antiques, but was released due to insufficient evidence. I pulled off the police badge pin and pinned it to my collar. Address: Ethan's apartment is on the top floor of the old city. The door is not closed tightly, and the smell of old book pages is revealed. When I pushed open the door, he was wiping the glass with his back to me. He turned around abruptly when he heard the noise. His Adam's apple moved, and his eyes drifted to the wall. The photo is hung in the center of the entrance. On the yellowed photo paper, the woman in a white dress had her face tilted to the side, with a high nose bridge and a faint mole on her left eyebrow. Her appearance overlapped with that of Jane in the convenience store surveillance video. Do you know her? I held up a copy of Jane's forged driver's license. He tugged at his collar and said, I don't know him. What about this one? I changed the witness registration form of Alicia Carter from 3 years ago. Alicia Carter, the key witness in the jewelry robbery 3 years ago. His fingers began tapping on the table once, twice, in the same rhythm as the lying suspect in the interrogation room. I pretended to sort through my notes and pressed the micro tracker into the crack of the door frame. Excuse me, I said, if you remember anything. No, he interrupted me. I don't know anything. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the red dot of the tracker moved on the map. I huddled in the patrol car, watching the location on my phone jump from the city to the suburbs, and finally stop at a scrapyard on the edge of an industrial area. It started to rain. After I'd parked my car in the green belt 200 meters away, the windshield wipers made the windshield blurry. 2 white lights suddenly appeared in the rearview mirror. It was a black car, and the high beam was so bright that I couldn't open my eyes. I lowered my seat and pretended to look at the navigation. The car slowly passed me, and the person in the driver's seat turned his face sideways. The scar ran diagonally from the corner of his left eye to his jaw. I had seen it 20 times in the case file. Colin Reed. My phone vibrated in my pocket and Jennifer's name popped up. I pressed the call button and stared at the taillights of Ethan's car in front of me. The red dot was still moving in the junkyard, but the high beam at the rear was getting closer and closer. The wipers stopped with a squeak. The rain on the windshield blurred 2 spots of light. One was Ethan's car, the other was Colin's. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. In the rearview mirror, Colin's car had slowed down and the turn signal started flashing. He was about to turn around. The phone vibrated again, and there were 3 missed calls from Jennifer. The iron gate of the scrapyard ahead suddenly opened. Ethan's car turned on the double flashes and slowly drove out. The moment I stepped on the accelerator, the horn of the car behind me honked. Which side to choose? I slammed the steering wheel. Colin's car had turned around, and the high beams cast 2 streaks of white light in the rain. My hand was numb from the vibrations of my phone as Jennifer's number popped up for the 4th time. Hawk, we have someone 2 kilometers due east of the scrapyard. The moment she answered the phone, her voice was as crisp as a bullet. Ethan Blair was registered in the Witness Protection Program 3 years ago. His code name was Ghost. He was responsible for forging identities for witnesses, but 3 months ago his record was suddenly cancelled. Does this have anything to do with Alicia? I wiped the fog off the windshield. Ethan's taillights were flashing against the iron gate of the junkyard. Not sure. Jennifer paused for half a second. But if he is now in contact with Jane, Alicia, we have to handle it with caution. The wiper suddenly got stuck, and the rain blurred my vision. I swerved onto the side road. Colin's license plate blurred in the rain in the rearview mirror. The phone vibrated, and Leah's message popped up. The indentation on the back of the receipt has been deciphered. It's Morse code. The coordinates point to an abandoned theater in the city center, the Starlight Theater that closed in Starlight Theater. I stepped on the brakes. The last update on Jane's social account was an old photo with a blurry neon sign in the background. I zoomed in and looked at it 7 times. There was a broken word light on the edge of the sign. The rain has stopped. I parked my car in the alley behind the theater, the police badge on my collar digging into my collarbone. There was a new iron wire hanging on the rusty lock of the back door. I took out my folding knife and pried it open. The smell of rust and mildew rushed into my nostrils. The powder room mirror was cracked into a spider web. I swept the flashlight across the countertop and saw the compact underneath the lipstick stain, the same color as the Gold Bar Saint Laurent lipstick in Jane's backpack. When I opened the powder box, I found a USB flash drive stuck under the sponge pad, and there were scratches on the metal surface, as if it had been clamped with tweezers. The screen flashed twice while the video loaded. Jane's face appeared among the snowflakes, and the faint mole on her left eyebrow was shaking. If you see this, it means I can't turn back. Colin won't stop here. He will look for the next target. Click. I turned around suddenly. In the reflection of the mirror, Ethan stood in the doorway, rain dripping down his hair onto the floor. He said nothing, his knuckles pressed against the countertop, with half a key sticking out from between his fingers.
I'm not the enemy. His voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. I'm just helping her finish her last performance. There's a secret room under the theater. She hid something that can end it all.
As soon as the key touched my palm, the light went out with a bang. In the darkness, the smell of rust permeated, mixed with the smell of damp tobacco. That was Colin's smell. I had smelled it in the case files before he went to prison. It was the smell of the Cuban cigars he always smoked. 3 full moons. His breath brushed the back of my neck. The first was in Chicago, the second was in Montreal, and the third. I dug my fingers into the teeth of the key. Ethan's footsteps were heard behind him, overlapping with Colin's footsteps like 2 drums beating. A mechanical sound came from the direction of the stage, and the spotlight lit up with a swish. Dust floated in the beam of light, shining on the shadow at my feet. I held my breath, and quietly moved my hand to the gun at my waist. Under the spotlight, as my finger touched the gun's safety, Ethan suddenly raised his hand. His shadow swayed in the spotlight, pointing to the center of the stage. "Look at the floor," he said. I lowered my head along the lines of his fingertips. On the mold-covered wooden floor, a very shallow square crack was faintly visible, with traces of fresh prying on the edge. It was the entrance to the secret room. Colin's footsteps echoed in the background like a pendulum. I gritted my teeth, squatted down, and inserted the key into the gap. The lock core turned 3 times, and with a click, the wooden board popped open. A musty smell was coming out. There were 3 black file boxes stacked in the secret room, with witness protection program seals on the lids. On the top was an old-fashioned tape recorder, and next to it stood a half-person high mirror. The mirror was cracked, like a spider web, and half a piece of broken diamond was stuck in the cracks. The pattern of the broken diamond was the same as the brooch in Jane's backpack. I took out the ultraviolet lamp and swept it across the wall. Light green writing appeared. "Only the dead can't be tracked." The phone vibrates. Leah's voice popped up, with the sound of keyboard tapping in the background. The theater surveillance has been restored. There was a blurry picture half a year ago. Jane and a white-haired old man were smoking backstage. She sent me a screenshot. The old man had a scar on the side of his face. It was Nolan Grayson. I remember his file. He was an informant for us 10 years ago, and then he retired and returned to Toronto. He lives at 23 Queen Street, Leah said. "Do you want me to hack into his door?" "No need." I closed the file box and said, "I'll go." Ethan suddenly grabbed my wrist. There were old scars on his palms, like cigarette burns. "She asked me to tell you. The mask is in the 3rd act." Colin's footsteps were getting closer. I shook off his hand and ran backstage. Nolan's door was unlocked. The old man was sitting in a rocking chair with a worn wool blanket covering his knees. When he looked up at the noise, there was a cloudy white film in his left eye. inconsistent with the description in the case file that he was hard of hearing but had an amazing memory. "Wrong person," he said in a hoarse voice. I took a picture of Jane and put it on the coffee table. The faint mole on her left eyebrow is clearly visible in the photo. Nolan's fingers paused, staring at the reflection in the mirror of the photo. That was the diamond brooch hanging on Jane's backpack, which matched the diamonds in the mirror, in the secret room perfectly. "Death mask," he said suddenly. "She came to borrow it last month. She said it was used to make the hunter believe that the prey was dead." He lifted the blanket and pulled out a yellowed script from the secret compartment in the floor. The cover was written with the last curtain call. Turning to the page with the red ribbon, the lines were marked in red pen. "Use stage blood bags to fake fatal injuries, mirror fragments to confuse DNA, and move from the safe house after 3 days. Hunters will only stare at corpses, not empty shells." "What else did she say?" I asked. Nolan fished out a box of mints, poured out 2 and put them in his mouth. "She said she wanted to borrow my retired identity. My name is in a suspended animation on the informant list, so the hunters can't find it." He tapped the script with his knuckles. "The advantage of being a stage manager is that you know all the secret doors." The phone vibrated again. Anonymous text message. "She is waiting for you to set a trap." I looked up suddenly. Nolan's white eyes suddenly turned and stared at the window behind me. A shadow flashed there, and it was the smell of Colin's Cuban cigars. "Let's go." Nolan pushed me. "Let's go to the theater." As I rushed into the back alley, the rain started to fall again. In the rearview mirror, the lights in Nolan's house were on, and a shadow swayed on the curtains, as if someone was looking for something. The door to the theater's back room stood open. I groped my way in the dark and found the switch for the tape recorder. Amid the sizzling sound of the tape, Jane's voice came out with an electric noise. "If you hear this, it means I am no longer here, but now that he is here, you should be ready." Pa! The sound of shattering glass exploded overhead. I looked up and saw half a piece of mirror fragment falling from the vent on the ceiling of the secret room. It rolled twice on the ground and reflected a blurry shadow. It was Colin's leather boots, stained with red mud from the alley outside the theater. The tape stopped with a click. In the darkness, there was the sound of a lighter clicking. The smell of Cuban cigars wafted over. The theater's ceiling lights suddenly lit up. I squinted and saw Colin leaning against the doorframe of the secret room, with the muzzle of his revolver pointed at the ground. He was wearing a washed-out leather jacket, and the cuffs were stained with red mud from backstage at the theater, exactly the same mud spots on the broken mirror in the vent. "Good acting." He tilted his head and smiled, tapping his temple with the barrel of the gun. "But as for the fake death trick, I should have learned my lesson when Alicia used witness protection to trick me in court 3 years ago. My finger was on the trigger of my service pistol and I didn't move. What he wants is Jane, and what I want is his flaws. Do you think she's just a witness?" A male voice came from the left. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan walk out from behind the curtain, his metal badge gleaming in the light. The FBI Special Operations Eagle, its edges still caked with theater dust. Colin's pupils shrank. "You are..." "She left the protection program a long time ago." Ethan rubbed his thumb over the pattern of the badge. "Now she is a hunter, and you are the fish she has been fishing for 3 years." Suddenly, there was a radio noise outside the secret room. Nolan's voice exploded from the theater speakers, mixed with electricity. "Alicia, the door of the backstage prop room is not locked." Colin turned sharply, pointing his gun at the source of the sound. I took the opportunity to move half a step to the right, and my boot heel crushed a piece of broken lens. Bang! He suddenly turned around and pointed his revolver at my forehead. "You want to get behind me? Do you think I spent 6 years in prison for nothing?" I felt a cold sweat on the back of my hands. The barrel of the gun was freezing cold. "Jane's plan is deeper than you think." I stared at myself shaking in his pupils. "She knew you would chase her, So she asked Nolan to use an old tape to fake your location and let Ethan Lang's identity disrupt you. Shut up. He flipped his wrist and the barrel of the gun hit me in the cheek. A sharp pain shot into my temple, and I stumbled towards the wall, feeling the pepper spray on my lower back. Click. The tip of the knife was against my throat. He pulled out a folding knife at some point, the blade glowing coldly. Do you think you can delay time by talking nonsense? She is either dead in the safe house. Don't touch her. The scream pierced the air like a needle. Margaret rushed in with a miniature camera, the lens pointed directly at Colin's face. Her curly hair was a mess, and she was wearing a man's windbreaker over her pajamas. Alberts, I have evidence! Her fingers were shaking so much that she couldn't press the record button. You went through Jane's garbage in the middle of the night last Wednesday, and you watched downstairs for 3 hours the Tuesday before last. And 3 days ago, Colin roared and swung the knife at the camera. Margaret screamed and squatted down, and the camera crashed down at my feet. The screen lit up, showing the surveillance video of Jane using tweezers to pick up her cufflinks late at night. Exactly the same as the one in Margaret's cloud backup. Chance. I leaned over and rammed his knees, blasting out the pepper spray at the same time. Colin groaned and stepped back, and I rushed over and grabbed his wrist. He grabbed my neck with his backhand, his nails almost digging into my skin. You can't win. He leaned close to my ear, his breath full of cigar smell. Is she really still alive? The woman who always says it's over. I need him in the stomach. He let go in pain, and I took the opportunity to twist his arm and press him to the ground. As the handcuffs clicked shut, he suddenly laughed. By the time you find Alicia's new safe house, she'll have been burned to ashes. I paused. Jane's voice exploded in my head. If you hear this, it means I am no longer where I am. The sound of sirens came closer and closer. I dragged Colin towards the theater exit and caught a glimpse of the backstage side door. A black SUV was slowly driving away with its windows rolled down. The figure turned his face sideways. The faint mole on her left eyebrow, and a gleaming diamond brooch on her backpack. She looks exactly like Jane in the photo. Colin suddenly struggled. Look, your hunter is running away. She has no intention of catching me. Shut up. I pulled his arm tightly and stared in the direction where the SUV disappeared. The rain dripped in down the brim of my hat into my collar, making me feel bone-chilled. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and found a new text message with no notes. The trap has been closed. Next stop, 17 Clarence Street. The rain stopped as Colin was put into the police car. He smiled at me through the car window, his lips opening and closing. Just wait, Alicia's death is the real beginning. I stood on the steps of the theater and looked at the half-broken mirror on the ground. My face was reflected inside, as were the taillights of cars gradually disappearing in the distance. The wind lifted the corner of my police uniform. Was Jane trying to lead me to catch Colin, or was she trying to lead Colin to catch me? Colin's heels scraped loudly on the steps as I led him to the police car. He tilted his head, blood still hanging from the corner of his mouth, where he hit the car door when struggling just now. You think you're done by catching me? He spat out the blood foam in his mouth. Alicia's death has just arrived. The lights in the interrogation room were blindingly white. Colin's handcuffs slammed against the iron table. He stared at the mud under his fingernails and suddenly laughed. I smelled her scent the day I dug a tunnel to escape from Ontario prison. He raised his eyes, his pupils shrank to pinpoints. When she identified me 3 years ago, she smelled of jasmine perfume. That smell lingered in the corridor of 17 Clarence Street for 3 whole months. I flipped through the notebook and stopped my pen at the tracking method column. How do you know for sure it's her? She changed her face and name, but the way she cleaned the mirror remained the same. He gestured with his handcuffed hands. Every time I passed her window, I could see her standing on tiptoe to clean the glass, with her right shoulder raised half an inch first. Exactly the same movement as when she wiped her tears in court. He He suddenly clenched the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. But I looked for all the places she might hide. The garbage station, the laundry room, the mailbox in the back alley. She was as slippery as a fish. So you went through her trash? I thought of Margaret's security footage. Last Wednesday at midnight, Colin stiffened his neck and said, "I'm looking for the address slip. She always writes the new address on the back of the receipt. That's how she fooled me 3 years ago." He suddenly lowered his voice. But this time, even the garbage is fake. Colin's words caught in his throat as the door opened. FBI liaison Jennifer Lane stood in the doorway, the trouser legs of her black suit stained by rain. She nodded at me and glanced at Colin. "We will synchronize his testimony." When we were the only two left in the interrogation room, Jennifer pulled out a brown paper bag from her briefcase. Alicia Carter was in a car accident in Ohio 2 weeks ago. She pushed over a copy of her death certificate. Her identity has been completely cancelled. Even the FBI system can't find her now. I stared at the blurry photo of the accident scene, my throat tightening. What about Jane Harper? It's her last disguise. Jennifer opened another folder, which contained an encrypted disk. She left a letter, saying that it would only be shown to the detective who presided over the case after it was closed. She tapped the disk with her fingertips. "The password is your badge number." The corridor of 17 Clarence Street still smells of disinfectant. I stood in the middle of Jane's room, and I picked out the corner of the receipt that was stuck in the cracks in the floor. It was the receipt from the antique shop with no certificates. I took out a magnifying glass and held it to the edge of the receipt. Embedded in the paper fibers were tiny particles of glitter, the same color as the diamond brooch on Jane's backpack. The ability of contact retrieval began to heat up. I held the receipt tightly, and in the last second before closing my eyes, I saw the green ivy on the windowsill. Mr. James said it was as wilted as the courage in which I hide my ID card. The 10-second footage seemed to have been fast-forwarded. Jane sat in front of the mirror and put fake moles on her face. She tore up an ID card, and the pieces fell into the fireplace. Sparks splashed on the back of her hand, but she didn't hide. This time, she smiled at herself in the mirror. "I want them to think I'm really dead." Leah's knocking was particularly loud in the technology room. She pushed up her glasses. The disc contains a hidden video, encrypted in the same way as the backup channel of the witness protection program. When the screen lit up, Jane's face filled the entire frame. She didn't wear a fake mole, and the faint mole on her left eyebrow was clearly visible. "Detective Hawke," she smiled. "If you see this, it means Colin is already in prison." She turned her face to the side, and half of the car window was reflected in the camera. "I'm already on the way to the next stop. I'm not using you." Her voice suddenly softened. "When I identified Colin 3 years ago, I thought justice was to send him to prison. Later I realized that some evil is like weeds, with roots in darker places." She pointed outside the camera. "If you meet another me one day, don't look at her as a fugitive. She is just digging out the roots of justice for us." At the end of the video, Leah touched my arm. The last direction she looked was the Ontario Museum's underground storage. It was very windy on the police station rooftop, late at night. I opened the case report and lightly traced the black mark in the column for Jane Harper with a pencil. It was indeed Alicia Carter underneath, but the ink had been deliberately blurred, like a blurry mist. I fished out a pen and wrote beneath the name, "May the real Alicia never have to run away again." The moment the pen cap was put on, I heard the scream of the receptionist downstairs. I leaned over and looked down. She was holding up a manila envelope and waving it at me. "Detective Hawke, just delivered. No sender is written." A copy of his ID slipped out of the envelope. The woman in the photo had a faint mole on her left eyebrow and a diamond brooch on her backpack. She looked exactly like Jane Harper. On the back was written a line of words in red pen, the ink not yet dry. "The next target is on the way." When I rushed into the technical room holding the copy, Leah was frowning at the computer. Strange. This ID card is in the system. There is no such person. I slapped the copy in front of her and said, check all traffic surveillance for any black SUVs that entered Toronto after 10 a.m. this morning. She looked up at me, and I realized my hands were shaking. The wind blew in through the window, making the photocopies rustle, and the woman in the photo was smiling at me. Exactly the same smile that Jane had in the video. When I rushed into the tech room with a copy of my ID in hand, the printer was still spitting out Jane Harper's surveillance footage. Leah's mouse suddenly got stuck, and the blue light from the screen made her nose shine. Hawk, this ID card is not in the system. There is no such person. Check the name column. I slapped the copy on the back of her hand. Lin Wan, born in Vancouver. The keyboard clicks sound like machine guns. Leah's pupils suddenly contracted. The note reads deregistered. Died in a car accident. I leaned over. The faint mole and diamond brooch in the photo look exactly like Jane Harper. A chill ran down the back of my neck. The other me that Jane mentioned in the video was here. The girl at the front desk screamed down the corridor. Technician Chen, your cousin is looking for you. Leah took off her glasses and rubbed her brow. I don't have a cousin in Vancouver. But when we went downstairs, the woman in the beige windbreaker had already put her arm around her. Her hair was slightly curled at the end, and she had dimples when she smiled. Leah, I haven't seen you for 3 years. You even changed your glasses to thin frames. Leah froze in place. The woman gave the address with familiarity. No, 114 7th Avenue. There are blue snowflakes growing on the second floor balcony. When you were a kid, you always stole my ballet skirt and stuck cotton candy hair on the hem of your skirt. Marshmallow left last year, Leah said in a muffled voice. I know. The woman took out a photo from her canvas bag. It was a ginger cat curled up on the sofa. I dreamt about it, scratching my bedroom door last month. I stared at her hands. Her nails were neatly manicured, and her fingertips had no calluses from housework, unlike ordinary tourists. Maybe I remembered it wrongly. Leah turned to look at me. My mother always said there was a distant cousin. I didn't respond. My intuition was like a needle pricking my temple. Lin Wan's last recorded contact was at 32 Clarence Street. Old Tom was squatting on the floor, sorting old magazines, when the doorbell of the second-hand bookstore rang. When he looked up, his glasses slid to the tip of his nose. Officer, checking for pirated books, checking the package from the FBI. I showed my ID. The recipient is Mirror Project. His finger paused on the cover of 100 Years of Solitude. Starting 3 years ago, there was a black cardboard box on the first of every month. He took out a torn notebook from under the counter and turned to the last page. In each box there was a note saying, "To the next Alicia." My throat tightened. Jane's words, "dig for us the roots of justice," were actually foreshadowed. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the lights in the technical room were still on. Leah rubbed the back of her neck. I checked the traffic surveillance 3 times, and there was no black SUV. Before she finished her words, the computer screen suddenly went black. A masked woman appeared on the screen, revealing only a pair of eyes with teardrop moles at the corners. You are not the first person to take over, and you will not be the last. I clutched my coat as the coordinates popped up. University of Toronto, Underground Library. Hawk. Leah grabbed my sleeve. This encryption method is the same as Jane's video. I took out my gun and ran out the door. As the night wind blew into my collar, my phone vibrated. It was Leah. I seemed to have remembered my cousin's birthday wrong. Her voice trembled. Erin said it was May 17th, but in the photo album, we don't have a cousin at all. I turned around and ran towards the police station. The lights at the front desk were still on. Leah was squatting beside a chair, holding a note in her hand. She's here. The handwriting is beautiful, and the ink is not dry yet. There was a sign saying, under maintenance, hanging on the iron door of the underground library. When the street lights flickered, a hint of red light seeped through the crack in the door, like a drop of blood that had not yet dried. I took out my gun and pushed open the door. The smell of mold and rust came out. There was a figure in the shadows with his back to me, his black coat hanging down to his feet. She turned half of her face. The faint mole on her left eyebrow was exactly the same as that on John and Lin Wan. "Welcome to the core of Project Mirror." Her voice was low, but it hit my eardrums like a heavy hammer. I held my breath. Her profile flickered in the red light. In the next second, she would turn around. The musty smell made me cough. The shadow finally turned around. The faint mole on the left eyebrow is exactly the same as in Jane's photo. Even the curvature of the jawline seems to have been measured with the same ruler. "My name is Lin Wan." Her voice was half an octave lower than Jane's. "A member of the 7th generation of the Mirror Project." The muzzle of my gun trembled slightly. The safety of the gun has not been turned on, but I can feel cold sweat soaking the handle of the gun. "What's the plan?" "This is a joint project between the FBI and the Canadian Department of Justice." She pulled out a metal USB flash drive from her coat pocket. "It is specifically designed to train agents with multiple identities, that is, substitutes used to mislead criminal organizations." When the USB drive was inserted into the phone's interface, an encrypted document popped up on the screen. Old photos from 5 years ago popped up one after another. A brown-haired woman in a nurse's uniform, an Asian girl in a baseball cap, a blonde housewife writing a diary in a cafe. Under each photo were the words "death certificate" and "transfer record." Jane Harper is from the 6th generation. Lin Wan's fingertips slid across the last photo. "The disappearance you have seen is our standard procedure: falsifying murders, creating disappearances, and laying out misleading clues. Every step requires the cooperation of local detectives." My throat is bitter. The type A blood in Jane's room 3 months ago. The cufflinks under the floor. The quarrel heard by the neighbors. It turned out that they were all plots in the script. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Ethan's number. I pressed the answer button and the maintenance light above my head flickered. "Ethan, did you help arrange Jane's fake death?" There was silence for 20 seconds. "We are just executors." His voice was like it had been polished by sandpaper. "The one who really controls all this is a special operations team in Washington." "Where's Nolan?" I clutched my phone tightly. "The retired informant. He taught us the art of disguise," Lin Wan suddenly said. "He used the same teaching materials as when he taught Jian." I hung up and turned to stare at her. "Albert said Jane sent the envelope with a 7 on it. The 7th generation." She nodded. "After each stand is transferred, it must leave guidance for the next generation." I took out the notepad Albert had given me. It was an old notebook the old man had found this morning, with a faint postmark on the rainy day page. "The technical department replied half an hour ago. This is an encrypted email sent to Ottawa, and the sender ID is Mirror 6. When I pressed the play button on the recording, Jane's voice came out of the phone. "If you hear this," her breathing was heavy as if she was running, "please confirm one thing for me. Have they really controlled all the exits?" The last syllable was cut off by the sound of electricity. When I looked up, Lin Wan was staring at the screen of my phone. "Exit," I repeated. "Each double has his or her own exit." She came over and tapped the back of my hand with her fingertips. "Jane's exit is the sewer at 17 Clarence Street, where she hid when she was first protected 3 years ago." I took a half step back. "So you asked the detective to investigate the case?" "Actually, it's a loophole in the verification plan." She smiled. "If even the local detectives can be misled, then it will be even more impossible for the pursuers to find the real person." There were footsteps in the hallway. I turned quickly, aiming my gun at the door. "It's Albert," Lin Wan said. "He comes to the library every day at 10:30 to return War and Peace." I put away my gun as the old man pushed open the door. He stared at Lin Wan, his reading glasses sliding to the tip of his nose. This lady, the raincoat you mentioned last time, was it navy blue? I interrupted him. Albert nodded. Yes, it was pulled down very low, but when she sent the letter, I saw a red stamp on the lower right corner of the envelope. He made a circle with his finger, with a 7 engraved inside. Lin Wan's hands tightened at her sides. I suddenly remembered Jane's social updates 3 days before she disappeared. It's time to end it. It turned out that this was not a farewell, but a handover, if you are all stand-ins. I stared into Lin Wan's eyes, which contained a calmness that Jane did not have. Who is the real Alicia Carter? She didn't answer, but turned and walked towards the innermost part of the library, her black coat sweeping across the dusty bookshelves. Follow me. She stopped in front of the third row of bookshelves and reached out to press the spine of a book called Federal Code. As the sound of metal friction was heard, I saw a secret door appear on the wall. A cold white light shone through the door, and I could vaguely see that the walls were covered with photos. All of them were different faces of Jane Harper. Lin Wan looked back at me. Her shadow was stretched out in the white light, like a thorn piercing into the darkness. To know the answer, you always have to look behind the mirror, she said. The moment the secret door opened, cold air filled with the smell of rust rushed out. I subconsciously reached for the gun at my waist, but my fingertips hit the wall first. The photos were too close, almost sticking to my face. Mirror project. Lin Wan's voice was like an ice cone. Every witness who needs to disappear will have 7 substitutes. Jane is the 3rd one, and I am the 7th one. Photos are arranged in timeline. The first row is Jane's face. The second row is a woman wearing glasses. The third row has a ponytail, and the last row is Lin Wan herself. But the one at the top, unnumbered and framed in matte black, made my back teeth ache. Jennifer Lane, the FBI liaison who always wore beige suits and spoke without emotion. Jennifer too? My voice was shaking. She is from the first generation. Lin Wan's fingertips slid across the photo. She is the only one who successfully quit. She completed the death scenario 10 years ago, and is now continuing to manage the plan as a liaison. She is both a supervisor and a survivor. I took a half step back, and my lower back hit the metal shelf. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Jennifer calling. You thought you were investigating a missing persons case. Her voice was lower than usual. You were helping us select the next executor. Screening. I clutched my phone, using the lives of witnesses as bait. Someone has to try and fail. She paused for 2 seconds. And you passed all the tests. After hanging up, I rushed into the apartment and dug out the case report. There was a patch of uneven paper on the inside of the cover. Someone had turned the pages. I pulled out the UV light, and as the light passed over the paper, a line of pale blue writing emerged. Alicia Carter never existed. The files of the jewel robbery 3 years ago surged through his memory. There was no such name on the list of witnesses. The so-called key witness was just a fictitious identity. Jane, Lin Wan, and the women in the photos are all shadows in the mirror. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I stood at the window. The neon lights of the convenience store downstairs turned the glass blood red, and my cell phone suddenly vibrated. New message. Now you know. 2 choices: join us, or be the next to disappear. I stared at the screen, my thumb slowly running over the name Jane Harper on the closed case report. When the pen nib pierced the paper, the ink spread over the word Harper like drops of congealed blood. Maybe I should also plan a perfect disappearance for myself, I said to the empty room. The next morning, the police received an anonymous report. A police detective suspected of leaking confidential documents is now absconding. In the surveillance video, the last person to leave the office was wearing a uniform with his hat pulled down low. The picture was blurry, but the reflection of the epaulettes, the slight limp he had when he walked, It was exactly like me. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, there lay half a torn photo. The woman in the photo has short hair and a small mole under her left eye. Written in red pen on the back is, "The real Alicia Carter, died November." At this moment my spare ID is hidden in the inside pocket of my coat. It started to rain. It was 4 in the morning, and I was crouching in Nolan's old warehouse, my flashlight sweeping across a row of dusty wooden crates. He stood behind me with a cigar in his mouth, and the sound of the burning match was particularly clear in the empty space. To fake a death, you need a corpse first. He kicked the innermost box with the tip of his shoe. The theater discarded the prop model 10 years ago. Its height and weight are 3 centimeters different from yours. That's enough. I opened the lid of the box and the smell of mold mixed with latex came out. The plastic model had her eyes closed, and a patch of faded bruise makeup on the left side of her face. Nolan handed over a magnifying glass. The fingerprint film is on the interlayer. I used the mug you drank coffee from last week to trace it. He tapped the model's fingertips with his knuckles. For the voice data, I intercepted a recording of you interrogating a prisoner from the police voice system. Biological reaction? He suddenly laughed. You had your blood drawn for your annual physical last month. I kept 2 extra tubes. My throat tightened. How did you? An informant's retirement doesn't mean his memory will retire. He stuffed the USB into my hand. Give these to Lin Wan, and tell her a detective out of control must fight to the death. The more they believe you're crazy, the less likely they are to investigate. Before daybreak, I knocked on Lin Wan's apartment door. She opened the door in her silk nightgown, with water dripping from the ends of her hair. I slapped the USB drive on the cabinet in the hallway and said, "Please help me pass it to them." "Are you sure?" She looked down at the USB drive, her fingernails tapping on the metal shell. "Let them believe that I'm out of control." I turned to leave, and she suddenly grabbed my sleeve. "Jennifer's rules are made to be broken." I pulled my hand back. "Why else do you think I came to you? The lock of the police archives room is still the same, and can be opened with a paper clip." I crouched down and crawled into the file rack. At the bottom of the 3rd row, the file bag related to the jewelry robbery 3 years ago was heavy as a feather. The brown paper seal was not stuck tightly. When I took out the transcript and turned to the signature page of the testimony, cold sweat suddenly broke out on the back of my neck. The handwriting of Alicia Carter on the signature line was exactly the same as that on Jane Harper's rental agreement. Even the curve of the last hook of the word C was exactly the same. I took out my cell phone to take a photo, and half of the glue marks were exposed on the edge of the paper. It was obvious that someone had replaced the original. "Want a copy?" I turned around suddenly and saw Leah standing at the end of the file shelf holding a mobile hard drive. Her white coat was stained with coffee, and her glasses were fogged up. "The surveillance camera caught you sneaking in at 2:30. I checked the video. I handed her the phone. "If I die, make this public." She stared at the signature page on the screen, her Adam's apple moving. "Who are you?" "A detective who is used as a pawn." I pulled off my tie and wrapped it around the file bag. "Now it's your turn to be the pawn. Promise me. I'll tell you the answer." She clenched the hard drive, her knuckles turning white. "Deal." It took 3 hours to set up the apartment explosion scene. I stuffed the low-explosive smoke bomb into the kitchen cupboard. The chemical formula I secretly learned in the police academy was enough to leave charred marks, but would not damage the load-bearing walls. The police badge was buried in the rubble of the living room, stained with the blood I squeezed from my fingertips last night. A DNA comparison would show a 19. When I was evacuating, I touched the inside pocket of my coat, and the edge of the spare ID was digging into my ribs. When I heard sirens downstairs, I was squatting on the roof of the opposite building, watching the fire hose rushing in through the window, and white smoke with a burnt smell rising into the sky. The headline popped up at 7 in the morning. Toronto Police Detective Hawk suspected of leaking confidential information, died in explosion at his residence. I stared at the screen of my phone until the words "confirmed dead" made my eyes sore. The cleaner's uniform was taken from the police station's logistics room and smelled of disinfectant. I pushed the cleaning cart into the building, and the security guard glanced at my work badge and let me in. They can never remember a cleaner's face. The server backup area is on the second underground floor. The password is the police force's internal birthday code. I tried 3 sets and it worked. The blue light illuminated the screen, and the words "encrypted log" suddenly popped up in the file list. The caption was handwritten and highlighted in red. "If you see this video, it means you no longer trust us." With the mouse hovering over the play button, I could hear my own heartbeat drowning out the hum of the air conditioner. Just as my fingertips were about to press down, footsteps were heard in the corridor. I quickly unplugged the USB drive. The cleaning truck knocked over the trash can as it turned around, and the metal lid fell to the ground with a clang.
"Who's in there?"
I crouched down and crawled into the server rack, my back touching the cold iron sheet. The footsteps were getting closer and closer, and the flashlight beam swept across the tips of my shoes. "It might be rats." The security guard's voice came through the door. "There have been rats everywhere lately." After their footsteps faded away, I took out my USB drive. The file size of the encrypted video is shown as 2G, which is enough to store half an hour of footage. "Jennifer," I whispered into the darkness, "what are you hiding?" The server screen suddenly flashed twice, and my distorted face was reflected in the blue light. A preview box automatically popped up for a certain file. Although there was only one frame, I could see it clearly. It was Jennifer's profile. There was a mole behind her ear, and the position was exactly the same as the photo of the dead witness in the jewelry robbery file 3 years ago. Footsteps were heard again in the corridor, more urgent this time. I grabbed the cleaning cart and rushed out the door, the USB drive burning in my pocket. It began to rain, water leaking from the vents dripping onto the back of my neck. On the screen of the server backup area, the playback progress bar of the encrypted video was slowly moving forward. By the time I pushed the cleaning cart into the safe house, the rain had soaked through my cuffs. He locked 3 doors, tore off his wig, and threw it into the trash can, and the USB flash drive left a red mark on his palm. Laptop startups sound like a heartbeat. The moment you insert a USB drive, a playback window will automatically pop up on the screen. Jennifer's face in the blue light suddenly came closer. The mole behind her ear was bluish-gray, exactly the same as the photo of the dead witness in the file 3 years ago. "Welcome to the first level of the truth." Her voice was like ice-soaked steel wire. "You think we're protecting witnesses? No, we're making chess pieces." I gripped the mouse so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The words "Mirror Project" exploded on the screen. Countless faces flashed behind Jennifer, a woman in a nurse's uniform, scanning a code in a convenience store, a man in a suit banging the gavel in the court, and the last photo suddenly enlarged. It was the real witness in the jewelry robbery file, the old woman who said in her testimony that Colin has a scar on his right ear. "Every death is a rebirth test." Jennifer's finger slid across the screen, and the old woman's face was marked with a red cross. "Those who pass become agents, and those who fail." The screen cut to a corpse in the alley, with a needle hole on its neck. "Become data." I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Jane's face is suddenly superimposed on the old woman's body. She has never met Colin. She has simply been chosen to be Alicia. The USB flash drive slipped in my palm. I yanked off the magnifying glass hanging around my neck and pressed the lens against the computer screen. 3 years ago, in the video recording of the trial in which Jane identified Colin as an eyewitness, there was no fear in her pupils, only well-trained calmness. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Leah's old mailbox. The attachment was 23 M in size, and the note contained only one line of text. "Gray domain protocol. Be careful of Marcus." My hands were shaking as I clicked on the attachment. The first page of the document reads Code of Conduct for Identity Agents, and the photo on the second page shows Marcus exchanging envelopes with a man in a baseball cap. It was 2 o'clock in the morning last Wednesday, at the back door of the police station. I heard footsteps in the corridor. I immediately unplugged my computer and hid it in the secret compartment under my bed. At the morning meeting the next day, Marcus's coffee cup was placed in its old position. I created a new unregistered agent file in the database, filled in Kate Mitchell in the name column, and wrote 2020 Port Warehouse arson case as the related case. It was an unsolved case, and there were no witnesses. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I made an excuse to check the database log. Marcus's account logged in at 3:17 and downloaded all the information about Kate Mitchell. When tracking the IP address, a line of small words popped up on the screen. Overseas encryption node, location unknown. I was standing on the rooftop of the police station when the night wind blew into my collar. Below was the river of light from the traffic, and above was Jennifer's voice seeping out of the Bluetooth headset. You have one last choice. Join us or... Her last words were like ashes blown away by the wind. Become the next story. I took out the lighter from my pocket and flipped the switch. The flames licked across the paper file of Kate Mitchell, and the sparks swirled in the wind, just like the embers at the scene of the jewel robbery 3 years ago. The phone vibrated in my pocket. The anonymous text message had only one sentence. Colin is at the used bookstore on Queen Street West tonight at 9 p.m. I tossed the burning paper into the trash and watched the flames engulf the name Kate Mitchell. Jennifer's voice was still lingering in my ears, and I stared at the address in the text message, tapping the police badge with my fingertips. It should have been burned to ashes in the explosion of the apartment, but now it was pinned under the second button of my shirt, cold to the bone. When I pressed the badge under the second button of my shirt, the metal edge hurt my skin. The anonymous text message was still on the phone screen. Queen Street West used bookstore, 9 o'clock, and the sender's number had long been marked by the system as an overseas black card, the same as the Grey Domain Protocol email 3 days ago. At 2 o'clock in the morning in the police archives, I found Colin Reed's case file. In the surveillance video of the jewelry robbery 3 years ago, the cufflinks he wore reflected light on the glass display case, and the pattern was exactly the same as the one stuck under the floor. But in the court record, Jane's testimony read, "When he turned around, I caught a glimpse of the cufflinks. They were custom made." However, the surveillance footage showed that the robber had his back to the jewelry cabinet the entire time. I took out the magnifying glass from my pocket and pressed the lens on Jane's identification record. The last stroke of her signature, Jane Harper, was long, like an elongated shadow, exactly the same arc as the signature on the antique shop receipt 3 months ago. "You were in Shackle Inn?" Marcus's voice exploded from behind. I didn't look back, staring at Colin's escape route on the computer screen. He escaped from the tunnel under Lake Ontario, and the route just past 17 Clarence Street. I heard someone passed him a message. His coffee cup was placed on my table, and the aroma was mixed with a familiar metallic smell, exactly the same as the smell of gunpowder left at the robbery scene 3 years ago. I turned off my computer. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell of the second-hand bookstore rang. Colin sat in the oak chair in the back row, his back to me, tapping his fingertips on a copy of Crime and Punishment. He didn't turn around. "Detective Hawke, you said you knew I was framed. Where is the evidence?" I pulled off the magnifying glass from my neck and placed it in front of him. At the robbery scene 3 years ago, the robbers were wearing titanium gloves. I flipped through his case file. But when you were arrested, your fingerprints were left intact on the display case. Titanium gloves don't leave marks. He finally turned around. There was a crescent scar under his left eye, which matched the photo in the prison file. So, Jane Harper's testimony was fabricated. I pulled out my phone and played Jane's trial video. Her pupils did not tremble, and her breathing rate was stable at 12 times per minute. That was the result of anti-lie detector training. Colin suddenly laughed. Do you think I really stole the jewelry? He grabbed the magnifying glass, and the lens reflected spots of light under the overhead light. I was just a scapegoat. Someone wants Alicia Carter to die on the witness stand, and I'm a handy tombstone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up.
Alicia Carter, the name blacked out in the case closing report, the witness who should have been dead 3 years ago.
Someone is coming. Colin suddenly listened. The moment the door was pushed open, I felt a pistol at my waist. The person who came in was a woman wearing a beige windbreaker, with short hair and a pearl earring hanging from her left ear. Exactly the same pair that Jane always wore in Margaret's camera.
Lin Wan.
She handed over a USB flash drive, a complete list of the Grey Domain Protocol, all the senior executives of the Mirror Project. Her voice was like sandpaper soaked in water. You can expose them, or replace them. The USB drive in my palm was burning. I stared at her earrings. Jane's earrings. Jane is agent number 17. She turned to leave, then stopped. Remember, the system never wants the truth. It wants a controllable story. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the corridor of 17 Clarence Street smelled of turpentine. Margaret squatted at the door, stuffing the hidden camera equipment into the cardboard box. I'm moving to Vancouver. She looked up, with dust in the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. Before I leave, I'll show you something. The photo slipped out of her palm. In the picture, under the dim light of the corridor, a figure wearing a hat was bending over to stuff something into the crack of Jane's door. That beige sweater was the one I bought at a second-hand store last Wednesday. That day you said you were picking up a package for Jane. Margaret dug her nails into the carton, but in the camera you were wearing her clothes and hat. Detective Hawke, who are you collecting for? I squeezed the photo. Last Wednesday, I did sign for a package in Jane's name that contained a witness protection expiration notice. The sender was the Mirror Project office. A corner of the curtain backstage at the theater was lifted by the wind. Nolan's voice came from the dressing room. The last performance of Oedipus Rex, come and watch. His face was as pale as paper without makeup, and he held a brass key in his hand. This is the door card of the Washington Archives. The real Alicia Carter, in safe deposit box. How do you know? I've buried too many dead bodies for them. He pressed the key into my hand, but Alicia is different. She escaped 3 times, and each time she managed to tear up the script given by the system. There is a rose engraved on the key handle, the same pattern as the brooch my mother left me. The wind on a full moon night smells of rust. I stood in the center of the theater stage, with 3 documents at my feet. The report letter contained the Grey Domain Protocol list. The Identity Conversion Protocol would allow me to become the new Mirror Executor, and the mission instructions required me to deal with Lin Wan and Colin. The moment the match was lit, the flame licked the edge of the report letter. With a click, the agreement was torn in half by me, and the fragments fell into the stove at my feet. Finally, I took out my cell phone and dialed the number that I had saved for 3 years without dialing. I'm Hawke, I said. I'm ready. The spotlight suddenly came on. In the reflection on the ground, 2 figures stood side by side. My shadow had clear outlines, but the other one was like ink soaked in water, with the edges blurred and almost melting. But the cinnabar mole behind the ear was exactly the same as Alicia Carter's prison photo 3 years ago. There were footsteps behind the curtain. I turned around, and my throat suddenly tightened. Hello, Ellery. The sound came from the darkness, as familiar as an old scar soaked in blood. I stared at the figure in the darkness. Her voice was like a steel wire dipped in ice, scratching my eardrums and hurting them. Hello, Ellery. I moved my Adam's apple. 3 years ago I saw Alicia Carter's prison photo in the prison archives. The cinnabar mole behind her ear was flashing in the spotlight as she walked. You're not Jane. My voice was a little hoarse. Jane? She smiled softly. and walked out of the shadows. The white shirt is tucked into black trousers, and the straight shoulder line is like a knife. That's the code name for the 6th generation of experimental subjects. I'm the prototype sample of the Mirror Project. Her fingertips traced the police badge on my chest. All of you are copies of me. Bang. The sound of the gunshot made me involuntarily take a half step back. At some point, Lin Wan pulled out a gun and pointed the muzzle at her forehead. But the next second, Alicia suddenly raised her hand, twisted her wrist, and the gun was in her hand. Candidate 07. She put the handle of the gun against Lin Wan's forehead, and with her other hand she took out a photo and threw it at my feet. The corners of the photo were curled up, and on it was a girl with a ponytail and a light brown mole behind her right ear. The position of the mole on Lin Wan's face was exactly the same. 7th generation of experimental subjects. Escape rate. Lin Wan's pupils suddenly contracted. She took 2 steps back and knocked over the makeup chair. The sound of the chair legs scraping across the ground was as harsh as nails scratching glass. The car accident 3 years ago. Nolan's voice came from backstage. He held up a yellowed photocopy with burn marks on the edges. There is a name on the death list, but the forensic doctor didn't extract DNA. He stared at Alicia, and his Adam's apple rolled. You are not dead at all. I tightly grasped the key in my pocket. The rose pattern hurt my palm. Bite. Margaret's voice exploded from the headset. Apparently she hadn't turned off the monitoring device. Her breathing was as heavy as a broken bellows. Hawk. I found the camera backup from 3 months ago. On the night Jane disappeared, a woman in a wig entered room 17 and replaced the things under the floor. I yanked off my headset and rushed backstage. The surveillance recovery equipment was still piled in the prop box. With trembling fingers, I quickly pulled up the footage from 17 Clarence Street. The screen flashed twice, and in night vision mode, a figure crouched into Jane's room. The movement of her lifting her wig was exactly the same as the arc of Alicia lifting her hair above her ears at this moment. Was it exciting? I turned around. At some point she had already stood in the center of the stage, spinning Lin Wan's gun in her hand. The spotlight cast a huge shadow behind her, completely covering my shadow. You think you're fighting the system? She tilted her head. You're wrong. She tapped her temple with the butt of the gun. You are part of the system. I just want to see who can be the most perfect replacement. She walked towards me, stepping on my shadow with every step. And you, she stopped in front of me, her nose almost touching mine, are my favorite attempt so far. Before he finished speaking, the lights in the theater suddenly went out. In the darkness there was the sound of wind blowing in. I reached for the flashlight at my waist and was about to press the switch when a beam of red light suddenly hit the center of the stage. When I blinked away the black stars in front of my eyes, there was no one there. Now it's your turn to make a choice. Her voice came from all directions, like countless tiny needles drilling into my ears. Keep hunting me, or become the next me. I clutched the flashlight tightly. The beam of light swept across the ground, revealing only a silver cufflink, reflecting light, where she had just stood. Exactly the same as Colin Reed's custom-made cufflinks left at the scene of the jewelry robbery 3 years ago. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out, and my heart skipped a beat the moment the screen lit up. It was a message from a colleague in the bureau. Hawk, the door of your office has been sealed by the headquarters. All the data on your computer has been cleared, and even the keyboard has been removed. I looked up toward the theater exit. The moonlight filtered through the stained glass, casting mottled shadows on the ground. I don't know if it's my illusion, but I always feel that among those shadows there is an outline with a cinnabar mole behind the ear, smiling at me. When I rushed into the police station, clutching my phone, cold sweat was still pouring out of the back of my neck. My office door at the end of the corridor was sealed with 3 strips of seals, and the keyhole was stuffed with a new lock cylinder, The brass lock that I locked myself before going out this morning was now like a piece of broken ice. Detective Hawke. The girl at the front desk passed by with a cup of coffee, her eyes drifting towards the seal. Someone from the headquarters just came in half an hour ago, saying that you are involved in an internal investigation. I tore off the seal and stuffed it into my pocket. Fingerprint lock. Ridiculous. When I was a prison guard 3 years ago, I could dismantle the access control system of the entire prison with my eyes closed. The metal sheet was inserted into the keyhole, and with a click, the door opened. The filing cabinet is empty. The magnifying glass in the drawer, the evidence bag, and the preliminary investigation report on the Jane Harper case 3 years ago were all gone. Even the relic of my father, a 1978 maple leaf coin under the keyboard, was taken away. I squatted on the floor, running my fingertips over the faint coffee stain on the carpet where I had knocked over Mocha last Wednesday. Some people want to wipe out even this little trace. Looking for this? The voice came from behind. I turned around and saw Lin Wan, leaning against the door frame, shaking a silver decoder in her hand. The mole behind her ear glowed dark purple under the corridor light, overlapping with its outline in the shadows of the theater. Nolan gave it to me. She tossed the decoder to me. I caught it and felt the surface was still warm. It's in the third row of Area B in the archives room, the innermost iron cabinet. The password is your birthday. She turned to leave, and I grabbed her wrist. The blood vessels under the skin beat very fast, like a precision instrument. Who are you? Just like you. She pulled her hand back. The chosen one. The surveillance in the archives room is broken. I crouched down and entered Area B, and the combination lock on the iron cabinet popped open with 2 beeps. An old floppy disk lay at the bottom, with the label written in red pen. Agent Assessment Report. Code. As the floppy disk was inserted into the decoder, I heard the sound of my Adam's apple rolling. The moment the screen lit up, blood rushed to my head. The person in the photo was me, my 2018 Police Academy graduation photo, and the light pink birthmark behind my right ear was clearly visible. Detective Hawke. I slammed the decoder shut. I don't know when Lin Wan stood behind me, with a USB flash drive in her hand. She slapped the USB drive in my palm. It was cooler than before. Jennifer's personal diary. She said, "You're the only one who can understand the truth." As the interrogation room's projector lit up, Jennifer's face flickered on the wall. She was not wearing an FBI uniform, and the second button of her white shirt was loose, as if she had just been pulled out of sleep. "We didn't intend to involve you at first, but you're too smart. The jewelry robbery 3 years ago was actually a test planned by the Department of Justice. Colin is an actor, and so is Alicia." I pressed the pause button. The door was kicked open, and Ethan rushed in holding an old tape recorder. There was motor oil on his forehead, and he had just run in from the warehouse. "Listen to this." Amid the noise of the tape, a vague male voice was heard. "Alicia's mission is to lead Colin to prison. Her disguise and anti-tracking are templates for subsequent agents. We need to observe the target's reaction under extreme pressure, such as Detective Hawke. She always likes to use a magnifying glass when investigating cases. This habit allows her to find drops of blood under the floor, which perfectly meets our requirements for a detail capturer." "That's enough." I turned off the recorder. His back teeth were sore from biting. "So Jane Harper's disappearance, Margaret's camera, and Albert's testimony were all scripted by you." Ethan said nothing, his knuckles white. Suddenly there was a sound of running in the corridor. Leah rushed in, grabbing Marcus by the collar, and the external hard drive in his hand was still flashing a red light. He was going to delete the internal communication records from 3 years ago. Leah gasped. I caught him in the server room. Marcus looked up at me, his glasses misted over. "I'm just following orders. You think you're investigating a case. Actually, you're helping them screen new members." He took out a photo from his pocket. I was standing at the door of 17 Clarence Street, holding Jane's rental contract in my hand, and behind me, in the second floor window, there was a man in a baseball cap holding a camera. They were watching you that day. It was dark when I walked out of the police station. The wind blew the sycamore leaves onto my face as I climbed up the fire escape to the rooftop. The city lights were like a handful of diamonds, but behind each light there was a pair of eyes from the Department of Justice, the FBI, and Alicia. The phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen lit up, and it was a new message. The sender's note was blank, and the content was just one line of text. You already know the answer, right? So when will you come to see me? I reached for the evidence bag at my waist. Inside was the silver cufflink that he had picked up on the floor of the theater, with some dark brown stuff on the edge. It could be blood, or it could be some kind of mark. Tonight is the 15th day of the lunar month, and the moon is as round as a coin. I took off my cufflinks, and as soon as my fingertips touched the metal surface, I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck. The ability of contact retracing is heating up. This is the third chance this month. I closed my eyes. I gripped the cufflinks tightly, my fingertips resting on the metal edge. The third chance to touch backtracking made the back of my neck feel hot and tingling. The moment I closed my eyes, a 10-second scene flooded into my mind. Behind the stage curtain, there was a thin crack in the wooden floor, and a bloody key was stuck inside, the blood stains as black as a piece of dried chocolate. On the list of physical evidence at the scene of Alicia's fake death 3 years ago, there was indeed a line stating a bloody key, suspected to have been left at the scene. The item was later marked as missing, and turned out to be hidden in the theater. At 11 o'clock at night, I climbed into the backstage of the Clarence Theater. The curtain was covered with dust. I used a magnifying glass to carefully examine the floor and found the crack. I used my fingernail to grab the gap, and pulled, and the key fell out with a ding. The blood had turned black, and a tiny AC was engraved on the edge of the key, the initials of Alicia Carter. As soon as my fingers touched the key, power surged uncontrollably. This time it was not a 10-second picture, but a clearer scene. In the underground archive room, the iron shelves were filled with cowhide file boxes, and the walls were covered with photos, arranged from left to right. The last one is my ID photo, with Candidate Hawk written in red pen below. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Leah sent a message. The blood on the key matches the sample from Alicia's scene 3 years ago, and the match is... I replied with an address. Checked the location of this archive room, and attached a picture of the pattern of the iron flower window. This old-style window frame, as recorded in the Ottawa archives, was specially used in the Government Materials Administration building in the night. Half an hour later, Leah called back. There was a secret room on the 3rd underground floor of the Waste Management Bureau building in District 12 of Ottawa. I put the key in the evidence bag and knocked on the door of the technical department. Leah was eating a sandwich. When she saw me come in, she wiped her mouth quickly and asked, "What system are you going to hack into? If you don't hear from me before noon tomorrow..." I pushed the USB drive in front of her. "Post this to the entire internet. It contains evidence of the Mirror Project manipulating Jane's disappearance and monitoring me." Leah nodded, and as she took the USB drive, she quickly hooked her pinky finger into the strap of my backpack. I knew it was a micro tracker, but I didn't remove it. When I walked out of the police station, Nolan was waiting for me at the alley. He held a cigar between his lips and threw an envelope over. "Albert forged the highway record, showing that you were on the highway to Vancouver at 3 in the morning. The Mirror Organization's people are heading there now." Inside the envelope was a surveillance screenshot. The license plate was mine, but the driver was a man in a hat. Albert, student, about the same height and build as me. "Thank you." I patted his shoulder. "What are you thanking me for?" He blew out a smoke ring. "When you were 6 years old, you squatted in my yard and watched ants. You could count the number of segments on each ant's antennae. I knew you were born to get involved in this mess. I drove out of town with 3 sets of license plates in the trunk. Change the license plate every 30 kilometers and avoid all roads with surveillance. There was no car tracking in the rearview mirror, and the navigation showed that we were 40 kilometers away from Ottawa. When the phone screen suddenly went black, they started blocking the signal. The iron door of the abandoned building had a rusty lock on it, which I opened with a master key. There was thick dust on the steps of the 3rd underground floor. The light from the flashlight shone on the wall, which was exactly the same as the iron flower windows in the flashback scene. The door to the archive room was not locked and creaked when it was opened. There was an old wooden table in the center, and a woman was sitting behind it. Her hair was neatly tied up and there were fine lines around her eyes, but she looked 70% like Jane Harper. She was Alicia Carter. Here they are. She pointed to the documents on the table. I have kept the withdrawal agreement, upgrade instructions, and the son you drew in kindergarten when you were 6 years old. I didn't say anything and reached for my waist. I unloaded the bullets from my service rifle ahead of time. If this was a trap, an empty gun would be safer than a live one. When you were a kid, you could tell the difference in length between each antenna when you observed ants. She went on. We'll wait for you to grow up, until you learn how to use a magnifying glass, until you discover the drops of blood under the floor. I pulled out my pistol and pointed it at my temple. You're wrong. Shoot. She laughed. My finger pressed down on the trigger. Click, only a hollow sound was heard. The moment the door was pushed open, I quickly put the gun back into my waist. The men in black rushed in, pointing their guns at me. Alicia stood up and adjusted her cuffs. Welcome aboard, eh? I looked up at the wall. The photos were turning automatically and stopped at the last photo, which was my face. A line of words beside it glowed coldly under the light. Agent number H01. Activation status completed. The moment the metal door was knocked open, I flipped my wrist and slid the empty gun into the holster on my waist. My shoulder hurt as 2 men in black pressed down on me, their knees pressing against my spine. As the handcuffs bit into my wrist bones, I caught a glimpse of the badge on the chest of the man on my left, a silver eagle with half a gear in its claws. It wasn't a police badge, not an FBI badge. Take it back. A deep male voice came from the door. I was dragged towards the corridor, my heels scraping against the dusty floor, leaving 2 white marks. The escort vehicle was a black business car. I was pressed into the middle of the back seat, with 1 person sitting on each side. The car windows were covered with anti-peep film, so I could only see the blurry skylight. As I was bumping onto the highway, the back of my neck suddenly felt hot. It was the micro tracker that Leah had attached to it. When she handed me my coffee yesterday, she rubbed something the size of a fingernail against the back of my neck and whispered, "Just in case." I stared at my reflection in the car window. There was a bump the size of a rice grain under the skin on the back of my neck. When the car passed the speed bump, I slammed into the car door and felt a dull pain on my forehead. The person on my left cursed. "Behave yourself." I bit my tongue and kept silent. Vibration can make the tracker's signal more stable. Leah should be able to capture it in the police station's monitoring room. "We've arrived at the toll booth," said the driver. Through the front windshield, you can see the uniformed toll collector sticking his head out. I counted the seconds, and the moment the car stopped, I knocked on the door again. This time he used more force, and the burning sensation at the back of his neck rushed up along the blood vessels. "I'll break your legs if you move again." The man on the right pinched my arm, his knuckles like iron pliers. I lowered my eyes and dug my nails into my palms. As long as Leah received the signal, Nolan and the others would move. Nolan should be in the old communications room on the top floor of the theater at this moment. The frequency of the antique radio that Albert found yesterday matches the informant channel he used before he retired. 3 hours after I left, they would find Alicia's hiding place emptied out and a half-burned piece of paper in the wastebasket.
Nightingale, Lin Wan's voice would explode from the radio. The top action team of the Mirror Project hijacked the target of the Witness Protection Program 3 years ago. The method was so clean that even the FBI couldn't find out.
And Leah was in the police station's technical room, typing away on the keyboard. When she hacked into the traffic system, the ends of her hair would hang down and sweep across the screen like a restless leaf. She should be staring at the red dot of the tracker now, marking my location on the map, and then forging an urgent mission, making the people in the mirror mistakenly think that I am in Montreal, and diverting half of the pursuers. Contact Ethan. She would press the call button. The rescue vehicle needs an electromagnetic interference device, and the window breaker needs to be able to shatter the bulletproof glass. Ethan's warehouse is in the port area, and the sound of the modified car can be heard halfway down the street. He would grin when he heard the command, tapping his wrench on the workbench. It's ready. I'm just waiting for this bitch to cry for help. But at this moment my car was leaving the highway and turning onto a dirt road. The trees on both sides were getting denser and denser, and the sunlight was cut into pieces by the treetops. Finally, we stopped in front of a concrete building. The walls were covered with ivy, and the letters on the lintel were mostly covered by moss. Nightingale Project. Project Nightingale. My throat tightened. When I was dragged out of the car, the wind smelled of rust. The metal door slowly rose in front of me, revealing a downward slope with pale lights inside. They pushed me inside, and my heel caught on the step. I staggered and held onto the wall. The wall was cold, like a frozen steel plate. Go in. The barrel of the gun poked me in the back. I looked up, and the metal door began to close. In the last ray of daylight, the burning sensation on the back of my neck suddenly disappeared. The tracker was disconnected. The sound was as light as a needle dropping to the ground, but it echoed on the eardrum. The countdown has begun. As the door closed completely, I could hear my own heartbeat. They pushed me deeper into the building. After turning 3 corners, the smell of disinfectant in the air was so strong that it was choking. Stop. A door appeared before my eyes. It was white, with no handle and no keyhole. Go in. I turned around and saw the man in black holding a gun. The door slid open behind me, and I stumbled inside. Everything in front of my eyes was white. The walls are white, the floor is white, and even the lights above are white. No windows, no doors. The sound of the door closing was like a stone sinking into the deep ocean. I slowly squatted down against the wall and touched the wall with my fingertips. It was metal, cool, smooth, and without any cracks. The light above my head suddenly became brighter, making it impossible to open my eyes. In the darkness there were footsteps approaching. Welcome home. The sound came from the speaker above my head, with a crackling sound like electricity. I raised my head and sweat dripped down my chin to the ground, forming a dark dot. The countdown second hand began to move. I slid down the wall and sat down. My knees hit the metal floor, and it hurt. The light above our heads suddenly turned bright white, making it impossible to open our eyes. I squinted my eyes and saw a shadow in the corner. A screw. Loose. The nail dug into the gap between the screws, and with a snap, it cracked. Drops of blood appeared and dripped onto the screws. The screw was lifted up, revealing a thin wire wrapped in red tape. The edges of the red tape were rough, as if they had been torn with fingernails. Someone left it. The vents buzzed. There was a sound of metal rubbing against each other, and something fell. I lunged for it and caught it. A small black square with the police department logo on the back. When I pressed it, Leah's voice exploded in my ears. Still alive? Nonsense. I wiped the sweat off my face. Can it be saved? No. Her voice was gurgling. The mirrored people are watching all the exits. You have to make your way to B3. How do you get there? Wires. She paused. Climb along the wires. That's the escape route. The wires ran along the wall and into the vents. I took off my shoes and stepped onto the windowsill. The vent filter is rusted and falls off when pushed. The pipes were full of dust, making people cough. I crawled in and my back rubbed against the wall of the pipe. It hurt. My knees were rubbed raw and blood seeped into my trouser legs. After climbing 10 meters, I heard a sound. Agent number H01 is about to be activated. Please confirm the target's affiliation. The mechanical sound looped, like knocking on the head. I stopped and felt a chill down my spine.
H01, is it?
The experimental numbers of the prison system 3 years ago should have been destroyed long ago. They didn't burn it clean. Please confirm the target's ownership. She belongs to the mirror. Another voice. A male voice seemed to float from far away. She should belong to us. I crawled faster. The pipe became narrower and narrower, and I could only move sideways. My elbow hit the raised metal piece, and the skin was torn. Blood dripped in the pipe, dripping. On the 7th count, the pipe suddenly tilted downward. My feet touched the steps, which were cement and damp. B3 floor. The exit is an iron door without a handle. I knocked on the door, and there was a dull metallic sound. The door lock is electronic, and the screen is black. No power. Or is it locked? There were footsteps behind me. Click. I turned around. The lights at the end of the corridor flickered, illuminating a figure. He was not tall, wearing a black sweatshirt with the brim of his hat pulled down low. She looked up and I saw her face clearly. Lane 1, keycard. She waved the thing in her hand, and a blue light danced in her palm. It can open this door. I stared at her. 3 days ago, at the convenience store, she helped me pick up my ID. Her hands were steady at the time, unlike those of an ordinary clerk. Now her sweatshirt pockets were bulging, as if she was hiding a gun. "Who are you?" I asked. "It's time to go." She didn't answer. "They're almost here." The iron door suddenly shook. I heard a shout from a distance. H01 is in B3. Lin Wan pulled me to the side. Her hands are very strong, as if she has practiced. The blue light on the keycard grew brighter, revealing an old scar on her wrist, the same spot where the witness mark had been drawn in Jane's disguise tutorial. "They're going to activate you." She lowered her voice, using a procedure from 3 years ago. "You have to get out." The electronic lock of the iron door suddenly lit up. A red light flashed, and there was a long beep sound. Lin Wan slapped the keycard on the card reader. The blue light and the red light collided with each other, making a crackling sound. 3 doors, she gasped. Open in order. The first one. Bang. The fire door at the end of the corridor was knocked open. A dark figure rushed in, gun raised. Lin Wan pushed me behind the door and stood in front of it. The keycard was still inserted in the card reader, and the blue light flickered like a heart beating too fast. "Go," she shouted. I grabbed the keycard. The card reader began to smoke, and the burning smell was pungent. Lin Wan's gun was already drawn, and gunshots rang out in the corridor. I turned around and inserted the keycard into the lock of the first door. Click. The first door opened, ending suspense. The blue light of the keycard illuminates the card reader of the second door, and Lin Wan's gunshots suddenly stop. There was a dull thud of something heavy falling behind me. I clenched my keycard tightly, the plastic shell becoming slippery with sweat. The red light at the second door began to flash, and the countdown numbers jumped on the screen. Lin Wan's gunfire suddenly stopped. My hand was shaking as I clenched the keycard. There was a dull thud of something hitting the ground behind me, as if someone was pressed into the carpet. The red light at the second door jumped to 0032, and the electronic sound was so piercing that it hurt my ears. "Lin Wan," I called out. No one responded. The shouting behind the iron gate was getting closer. I gritted my teeth and inserted the keycard into the lock of the first door. With a click, the door opened. This is an archive room. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each layer filled with brown paper bags with names I'd seen on the labels. Jane Harper, Alicia Carter, all the dead witnesses from the jewel heist 3 years earlier. The thickest file on the top stack had my name printed on the cover, Ellery Hawk. go. Ethan's voice exploded from the headset. They cut off the ventilation system. The oxygen is only enough to last for 4 minutes. I tore off Jane's file at the top, and the seal cracked with a swish. The photo fell out. It was Alicia Carter's ID photo, and it matched the photo with the blacked out name I saw in the case report. The card reader for the second door was lukewarm. I slapped the key card on it, and blue and red lights intertwined. The moment the door opened, a musty smell came out. That was the smell of 17 Clarence Street. The walls of the simulation training room were covered with wallpaper from apartment 17, with the same faded rose pattern as Margaret's. There was fake blood stuffed in the cracks of the floorboards, the exact same color as the type A blood I found in Jane's room. In the corner was the cash register of the antique shop, and on the screen was scrolling, "It's time to end." Exactly the content of Jane's last update. They are recreating the case. Ethan's voice was a little nervous. All the clues you investigated were training questions. The red light at the third door began to flash. I rushed over, and as soon as the key card touched the card reader, the door opened with a buzz. The psychological assessment room is smaller than the previous two. There was a document on the table in the middle. The cover had candidate final testing agreement written in gold foil. My name was in the candidate name column, and the ink was not dry yet. The accept and reject buttons flashed cold light. I reached out to open the file, and suddenly I heard Leah's scream in the headset. "Don't touch it." I hacked into the server. The Nightingale Project is not about protecting witnesses at all. They are training replaceable law enforcement officers. Every piece of evidence and every witness you come into contact with during the investigation is a screening mark.
Including me?
I heard my voice trembling. Including me. Leah's breathing became rapid. Margaret just sent a surveillance video. Jennifer and Alicia were in the warehouse. Alicia held up your childhood photo and said, "Her trauma is deep enough, suitable for deep hypnosis." My temple was throbbing. 3 years ago when I was a prison guard, the crazy prisoner who always put his face against the iron bars suddenly appeared in my mind. He grabbed my sleeve and said, with a smile, "You will find a mirror sooner or later. They are waiting for you in the mirror." I looked up at the mirror on the wall. The me in the mirror blinked half a beat slower than me. I reached out to touch the mirror. As soon as my fingertips touched the glass, the whole wall creaked. The mirror was like a curtain that had been pulled back, revealing the concrete steps behind it, extending down into the darkness. The document is still on the table. I glanced at the accept button, then at the decline button. Both options were glowing an eerie blue. I pulled off my headset and threw it into the pile of papers. "Ethan, blow up the backup power supply," I said into the empty headset. The wind from the tunnel blew in, bringing with it a smell of rust. I ran down 20 steps and heard a bang behind me. Ethan was making his move. At the end of the stairs is an iron gate. I pushed open the door, and the moonlight poured down on me. Looking up, the moon was round and bright, like a white bullet. Explosions were heard in the distance, and flames dyed the clouds blood red. The base of the Nightingale Project was burning. I touched Jane's file in my pocket and turned to walk deeper into the tunnel. The further down you go, the stronger the musty smell becomes. After turning the last corner, the concrete wall turned into a mottled brick wall, with several rusty oil drums piled at the base of the wall. There was a sound of dripping water ahead. Tick-tock. I stopped. There was the outline of a car in the darkness, its headlights covered in dust and its license plate half removed. At the end of the tunnel is an abandoned underground garage. The smell of engine oil was so choking that I couldn't open my eyes. As soon as I stepped out of the passage, the light of the cold light flashlight shone on my forehead. 3 minutes earlier than expected, Jennifer's voice came from the shadows, and the intercom in her palm glowed with a faint blue light. "But you know too much." Suddenly there was a sound of wind coming from the right. Lin 1 flashed out from behind the pillar and pointed the muzzle of the gun precisely at the back of Jennifer's neck. "Don't move." She didn't look at me. but stared at the back of Jennifer's head. She is Nightingale's executive officer, responsible for selecting replacements for law enforcers. I narrowed my eyes. Those clues that Jennifer happened to intercept, the warnings that were always issued one step ahead. It turned out that she had long used my investigation trajectory as a Ethan's urgent voice came from the headset. There are 4 minutes left for the surveillance to restart. He was panting heavily. The jammer has been attached, but it can only hold them back for 2 minutes at most. Jennifer smiled. She did not dodge Lin Wan's gun, but turned her face away. The moonlight filtered in through the broken window, revealing the coldness in her eyes. Think you've won? The mirror project is just the tip of the iceberg. She took out a photo, the corners of which had curled up. The madman clinging to the railing in the prison. Is my dad? There was a buzzing sound in my temple. The touch of those hands 3 years ago suddenly came to my mind. The smell of rust between his fingernails when he grabbed my sleeves. Your memories, motivations, behavior patterns. Jennifer's voice was as sharp as a blade scraping glass. They all training data. The evidence you touched and the people you questioned when you were investigating a case. She tapped her temple with her knuckles. They are all marked for you. Leah's scream came from the headset. 2 SUVs. They will be here in 3 minutes. Lin Wan's gun barrel trembled. Ellery, kill her. I stared at Jennifer. Her smile didn't change, as if she had expected that I wouldn't do anything. As the handcuffs slid from my trouser pocket into my palm, I touched the corner of Jane's file. There was the blacked out Alicia Carter, and the rewritten death. I want to leave her alive. I pulled out Jennifer's walkie-talkie and threw it to the ground. With the sound of metal clanging, I handcuffed her wrists. I will find out the truth. Just check whatever you want. Jennifer stared at me. You're already trapped in the mirror anyway. Lin Wan tugged at my arm. Let's go. There was a sharp sound of tires rubbing against the ground outside the tunnel. As we rushed into Ethan's car, the taillights illuminated Jennifer's shadow, her head tilted, her mouth grinning from ear to ear, and her handcuffs made a crisp sound when they dangled against the pillar. Fasten your seat belts. Ethan stepped on the accelerator. The moment the car rushed out of the garage, Jennifer's smile in the rearview mirror suddenly enlarged, like a ball of black mist that could not be dissolved. Lin Wan took out a USB flash drive. The metal gleamed in the moonlight as she inserted the USB drive into the laptop sitting in front of the passenger seat. This is... I stared at the blue light on the screen. Jennifer's encrypted log. Lin Wan's fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. Before Leah hacked into the server, I took her back up. The car bumped onto a suburban road. In the distance, police sirens sounded, getting closer and closer. The password is... Lin Wan suddenly stopped. She stared at the screen, her pupils shrinking to the size of pinpoints. Ellery, look at this. I moved closer. There is a photo at the bottom of the document. I am wearing a prison guard uniform, standing in front of the iron bars. There was a date in the corner of the photo, 3 years ago, the day I first saw the crazy prisoner. And this. Lin Wan clicked on the next file. In the video, a man in a white coat holds up a syringe and says to the camera, "Candidate number 07, trauma index 9, suitable for deep hypnosis." The scene switched to the operating room. I lay on the operating table with my eyes closed and electrodes on my forehead. Did they perform surgery on you? Lin Wan's voice trembled. I touched the back of my neck. There is a light pink scar there, and I always thought it was left by a fall when I was a child. The moonlight outside the car window was suddenly blocked by clouds. Lin Wan's hands were shaking, and the USB flash drive made a click sound in the computer. Data reading completed. The computer prompt sounded like a knife. Analyzing memory modification records. Ethan looked in the rearview mirror. 2 minutes to the safe house. I stared at the code scrolling across the screen. The name Alicia Carter suddenly popped up, followed by memory overwrite successful. Further down there was my name, Ellery Hawk. and the note column read, "Ultimate test subject." The car turned the last corner. Linwan's finger hovered on the open button, and the moonlight shone into the car window again, making the USB flash drive flash with a cold light. "Do you want to open it?" she asked. I touched the scar on the back of my neck. The light of the safe house in the distance came on, like a glowing red eye. "Open it," I said. The computer fan started roaring. In the rearview mirror, Jennifer's smile suddenly appeared, exactly the same as that of the crazy prisoner 3 years ago. The fan in the car computer was spinning like it was about to explode. Lin Wan's fingers hovered over the touchpad, and the blue light made her face turn blue. Analysis complete. The moment the mechanical sound exploded, a fuzzy video popped up on the screen.
"I stared at the young prison guard in the picture. That was me 10 years ago."
The police officer, with the trainee badge on his epaulettes, was banging on the table through the iron railings. The man being interrogated was handcuffed, and his profile looked 70% like Jennifer. "Sample 0. Len Wan gasped. "Jennifer's father." My phone suddenly vibrated. Nolan's name jumped glaringly on the screen, and I pressed the speakerphone button. This video should have been destroyed along with the early files of Nightingale. His voice was like sandpaper scraping across the microphone, but I secretly kept a backup. "You think Nightingale is protecting witnesses? Wrong. Their earliest goal was to create the perfect law enforcer. Psychological manipulation, memory reconstruction, and behavioral simulation." I touched the scar on the back of my neck. The pale pink mark felt hot in my palm. "You were the closest case to success they had." Nolan's words were like an ice pick, until that crazy prisoner showed up 3 years ago, and they discovered cracks in your memory layer. Lin Wan suddenly pulled my sleeve. Margaret's voice popped up, with the rustling of papers in the background. "I found an old metal box in the trunk of your previous car, and the lock had been pried open. It was full of Detective Hawk's files, and there was a baby picture with Alicia Carter written on the back. Alicia Carter, Jane Harper's real name. The witness who should have died at the hands of Colin 3 years ago." Ethan suddenly honked. The headlights swept past the road sign. The safe house was still half a kilometer away. The prompt tone of the theater channel sounded immediately afterwards. Albert's voice was electric. Decoding completed. There were 3 people who participated in the Nightingale child experiment, and all of them were implanted with false memories. He paused for 2 seconds. "One of them is you now." My throat tightened. "Original memory. You kept the fragments," Albert said, "in the images you took every time you looked at the evidence through your magnifying glass. The things you thought were contact recalls. The carriage was so quiet that you could hear your heartbeat." I reached for the evidence bag I was carrying, and my fingertips touched the edge of a cufflink. The bloody cufflink that I had found under the floorboards of 17 Clarence Street. The feeling of metal against skin brought a sudden rush of memories. White walls, and the smell of disinfectant. The woman in the white coat squatted in front of me, her eyes like 2 drops of ink. "Remember, your name is Nightingale." I clutched my cufflinks tightly, and the sharp edges hurt my palms. "So contact recall is not an ability," I said to the air. "It's the memory fragments they didn't clean up." Lin Wan put her hand over. "Ellery, I'm no one's tool," I interrupted her. The scar on the back of his neck burned badly, as if someone had held a branding iron to his skin. Ethan parked the car in front of the iron gate of the safe house. The door light was red, like a single eye. I loosened my cufflinks, leaving a crescent-shaped mark on my palm. He took out the key and inserted it into the port of the onboard computer, and the new tracking program started running. For the last time, I said to myself in the rearview mirror. The night wind blew in through the car window, making the cufflinks jingle softly in the evidence bag. I took it out, and the metal surface still retained body temperature. Tomorrow, I will enable contact. Look back for the last time. Target. This cufflink. I clutched the cufflinks in my palm. The metal edges hurt. as if reminding me that this was the last time. The scar on the back of my neck began to feel hot, burning outward from beneath the skin. I closed my eyes tightly and dug my fingernails into my palms. This was the awakening ritual Nolan taught me, which he said could prevent the memory fragments from backlashing. But at this moment I am eager to fight back. I want to tear off all the disguises. As soon as my fingertips touched the surface of the cufflinks, a sharp pain exploded from my temple. The smell of disinfectant suddenly rushed into my nose. It was not the cold smell of the police station's evidence room, but a stronger fishy smell mixed with rust. The picture flashed too fast. The man in the dark grey suit had his back to me and had a dark red birthmark on the back of his neck. Colin Reed. He was putting his credit card on the glass counter. Half of his face was reflected on the counter, and there was a scar on his brow. The cufflink was placed on the counter, its silver pattern glowing coldly under the spotlight. Carve CR as fast as possible. His voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. There was a woman standing behind the counter. I almost shouted out loud when she turned her face to the side. Jennifer Lopez, the FBI agent who was in charge of the witness protection program 3 years ago. She smiled and nodded, revealing a blue butterfly earring behind her ear, exactly the same as the one I found in Jane Alicia's old apartment. The background wall suddenly became clear. On a dark grey background, a nightingale holding a key spreads its wings, and below it are the gold-plated letters, Nightingale Project. My eyes suddenly opened and my cufflinks fell onto the table with a clang. Benoit's hand was already on my shoulder, and the silver bracelet on her wrist hurt me. Did you see it? Antique shop. I grabbed the magnifying glass on the table and pressed the lens against the cufflinks. Colin had them custom made at Jennifer's shop 3 years ago. There's a Nightingale Project logo on the background wall. Lin Wan's cell phone dinged. She glanced at the screen, and when she looked up her pupils shrank to pinpoints. Jennifer died 3 years ago. The medical examiner's report said she died of a gas leak in the apartment on the night Jane identified Colin. I grabbed the antique store receipt from the evidence bag. It was dated 3 months ago, with no store name. But there was a very light indentation on the edge of the receipt, the outline of a butterfly's wings. Locate Jennifer's property. I slapped the receipt in front of Lin Wan, abandoned hospital outside of Toronto. Lin Wan's fingers moved quickly on her phone. Ethan has checked. Jennifer's father is an old military doctor. After retirement, he transformed the clinic into a private hospital. It closed down 5 years ago, and now, this is Colin's hiding place now. I interrupted her. He's not looking for Jane, but the secret of the Nightingale Project. And Jane is just the bait they put on the table. The alarm suddenly rang. Leah's face appeared on the surveillance screen. Her hair was scattered on her forehead, and the sound of her keyboard was like a machine gun. Marcus is hacking the police system. He wants to start the mirror protocol and activate all the hidden agents. How long will it take? Lin Wan's voice was as cold as ice. 3 minutes. Leah's fingertips paused, but I hacked into his backup disk. Ellery, the Trojan you gave me last time. Use it. I grabbed my jacket and pulled it on. Override his permissions and upload it to Interpol. Lin Wan had already thrown the car keys over. Ethan is waiting downstairs. I'll take care of the hospital's power supply system, and Leah will be responsible for disconnecting the network. Colin's automatic defense system needs power support. Wait. I reached for the pistol at my waist, then stopped. The bullet made a light sound in the gun chamber. If Colin had a gun, you don't need to shoot. Lin Wan suddenly laughed. You have something sharper than a bullet. The iron door of the abandoned hospital is covered with rust. I stepped on the ground full of broken glass, and the heels of my boots hit the concrete floor, echoing like they were hitting my head. The lights in the basement suddenly went out. Leah's text message popped up. Power has been cut off. Countdown to 10 minutes. There were footsteps in the darkness, very slow like a pendulum. Detective Hawke. Colin's voice came from the left, with a rotten sweetness. You are smarter than Jane. She hid from me for 3 years, and you found her in one day. I took out my cufflinks, the metal glowing in the dark. Do you think Jane identified you to protect herself? What else? His breath got closer, and I could even smell the tobacco on him. She put me in jail for 3 years, and now you should ask Jennifer. I threw the cufflink into the air, and it drew a silver arc in the darkness. When you robbed the jewelry store 3 years ago, Jennifer's car was parked at the entrance of the alley. She provided you with the route, forged an alibi for you, and then had Jane testify in court. Colin's breath hitched. You think Jane is a witness? I continued. She is a test subject of the Nightingale Project. Like me, she was implanted with false memories. And Jennifer, she is the one who wants you to go to jail, because you know too many secrets of the Nightingale. There was the sound of metal hitting the ground. It was a gun. Evidence? His voice was trembling. I took out a piece of paper torn from Jennifer's old file. On it was the transfer record between her and the jewelry store owner. This is the money she remitted to the jeweler 3 years ago, and the note was "Lure the snake out of its hole." A low laugh came from the darkness. It's not Colin's. It's mine. No, it was lighter, like wind blowing through broken glass. You think you won? Colin suddenly grabbed my wrist with such force that it seemed to break my bones. But Nightingale will not let you go. They planted a tracking chip in the back of your neck and buried a bomb in your memory. I know. I held his pulse point with my backhand, so I asked Leah to hack into their system. All the experimental data is now in the hands of Interpol. His grip loosened. The sound of sirens came from a distance. Red and blue lights illuminated the basement. Lenoir rushed in with a gun in hand. Ethan's flashlight swept across the gun at Colin's feet. Come with us. Lenoir did not move her gun. We'll wait here for the judge. Colin stared at me, his eyes red as blood. Who are you? My name is Ellery Hawke. I stepped back, out of the way of the police lights. Not a Nightingale. Lenoir handed me an ID card. The photo was of me, but the name column was blank. You can pick any name, she said. Paris, Tokyo, Cape Town. No thanks. I pushed the ID back. I want my real name. She was stunned for a moment, then suddenly smiled. I knew it. The morning light shines on my face. I took out the magnifying glass I carried with me and adjusted the angle towards the sun. The light refracted into thin needles and fell on a tall building 2 kilometers away. A figure flashed by the top floor window. He was a man wearing a dark gray suit, with a dark red birthmark on the back of his neck. I squinted my eyes. The magnifying glass felt hot in my palm, like some kind of coal. Next case, I said to the wind. It's time to start. That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.